Welcome to this new episode of the FinCrime Agent podcast, where I sit down with industry leaders to bring you insight and useful updates for your career in financial crime prevention. Today, I have the pleasure to host Quentin Downs. Many of you often ask me about jobs and career opportunities in our industry, and Quentin specializes in recruiting for regulated businesses, compliance, financial crime, risk, legal, and finance, of course. He's the founder of 2084, where with his team they are filling complex roles in the talent short markets. Quentin can provide tailored support with CVs, interviews, and career planning to set candidates up for success. So I could not host a better guest on the show today to talk about jobs and career opportunities. So welcome, Quentin. How are you today?
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Marco. Thanks very much for that superb introduction as well. Really good. Really looking forward to this, and hoping people find it useful.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's my pleasure to host you, and I really look forward to our one-to-one session. Wanted to start, if you could please maybe provide an overview of the different career pathways that are available in financial crime prevention, such as AML, fraud prevention, and sanctions compliance, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, be very happy to do that. There's lots of different opportunities. I mean, it's a very wide field. It's a very exciting field. And there's, I guess, different areas could lead to different types of skill sets. So I think it would depend on the types of skills and ability that a person has in which field they go into. But as you've rightly mentioned, there's big demand in AML, so anti-money laundering is a key area, and I guess we could probably make a distinction between across all the areas really between first and second line. So on the AML side, I guess first line would include roles like KYC or onboarding or enhanced due diligence, which lend themselves to quite strong investigatory type skills, and there's also second line. So in the second line, there would be second line controls and policies and oversight over the first line AML functions. So that would be more regulatory driven. So concentrating on and focusing on the regulations. You mentioned fraud, so absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, fraud is particularly in the UK. Unfortunately, we have a lot of fraud, and I think recently it's been announced that fraud is the biggest crime in the UK.
It is.
It is, yeah, and it's an astounding amount. And unfortunately, I think because we work on everything's on a global platform. I think, unfortunately, the UK is earmarked by companies and businesses that want to work here and look at the UK. That is a key risk to come and do commercial activity in the UK, is the amount of fraud that happens here. So if you're going into a fraud prevention career, then that's there's definitely plenty of work, and there have been some new regulations in that space as well. So APP fraud, for example, is a fairly new regulation within the last few months from the Financial Conduct Authority, and we expect there to be more work in that space due to these regulations and just the sheer volume of fraud. I think we all know someone that's been impacted by fraud. So, and I think fraud roles, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Marco, but certainly we've seen the fraud roles we've seen do lend themselves to be quite technical. So they quite often will look for people with strong IT skills, because a lot of fraud is combated through AI and technology and people that are able to update and change the rules in the system and locate different types of typologies really of fraud. If you wanted to move into more, a very regulatory focused area, where there's a very strong lean to understanding lots of different rules around sanctions, and working out fairly complex problems about where you can trade and where you can't trade, and where if you're onboarding customers that have certain activities in certain jurisdictions, what type of sanctions rules applies to those. Then sanctions could be a really good area too. There's lots of different opportunities within those areas. So you could go into an advisory role, you could go into a compliance monitoring or financial crime monitoring role, where basically you ensure that the business, you audit the business to make sure it adheres to the policies and controls and the regulations. So there's a huge array of careers available, and I think it really depends on a person's skill set.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the market is still booming quite a lot because in different fields and different domains, there are still plenty of opportunities. And despite the change from the technology perspective, which is definitely helping, we still need a lot of people that help us to move forward from first the second line of defense, but also in the audit space in a third line of defense. So yeah, I just mentioned now the technology perspective. So what essential technical but also soft skills business are currently seeking for financial crime professionals today?
Yeah, absolutely. I will come back and answer that question very shortly, Mark. I just wanted to add one more point to that first question. There's a lot of different types of roles within the financial crime sphere, but I'd also say there's also a lot of different types of organisations too. And so I think there's just from a career pathway perspective, there's also a lot of choice about what type of business you go and work for. So, is it a compliance consultancy where you have to, it's very commercial and you have to sell as well as be a regulatory expert? Is it, or do you want to go and work for a fintech or a big bank or an insurance company, or even possibly outside of the Financial Conduct Authority regulated space? So work for a legal firm, for example, in a financial crime role. So there's so many different opportunities and avenues, and I think it's down to an individual really, which pathway they choose. But we can talk about the demand in some of those different areas a bit later. That's a key thing to think about as well. So it's not just the type of financial crime that you want to combat, but it's also the type of business that you want to do it essentially. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a lot. I mean, yeah, there are some essential technical and soft skills required. And I think, as I'm sure you know, Marco, it's a very fast changing regulatory world out there at the moment. There's so many changes happening in regulations, not just in the UK but internationally, and also there's a lot of businesses out there that are growing really quickly, and so it takes, I guess, there is some very specific skill sets that are required from a from a soft skill perspective in particular. So adaptability is a key one, I think. People have to be very adaptable to all the kind of the changing regulations, and also the competing and changing priorities in the businesses that they work in. That's things change all the time. Maybe the priority due to a regulatory issue is the financial crime team, but then that then may move away to the front office team, back to the commercial side. So there's always competing departments within a business that are vying for the same budgets. So I think people have to be adaptable and resilient. I think that's quite key. I think being able to almost sell financial crime to the business is quite an important skill set, particularly in the first line and the second line. So being able to ensure that the business, and when I say the business, I'm talking about the front office, understand that compliance it protects the business and also helps enable the business. So those are key things to get across for people to be able to communicate. And I think if different parts of the business understand that, then relationships become very solid with the financial crime teams, and the financial crime team is less regarded as being a bit of a blocker to business, which I think is outdated, to be fair, or certainly that's the way I've seen it. Although you'd be surprised, I do still hear people say, that the financial crime and compliance teams do block commercial activities, but certainly what I've seen is more of more of compliance being more of an enabler and a protector.
Probably in the last couple of decades, we've seen the volume of fines, the cost on reputational damage, and all these elements that are, of course, bringing down significantly all the work that is done by the business side. I agree with you that the old perspective of seeing compliance as a detached part, which is just on its own trying to comply with regulations, is a bit outdated nowadays. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think from a technical skills perspective, the as there is a lot of change in technology, and technology is helping financial crime officers do their roles more effectively. So there is certainly, we have seen more of a demand for people to have an understanding of the underlying technology that helps the role. So let's take, for example, transaction monitoring. Being able to understand how a transaction monitoring tool works, the technology behind it, being able to look at the rules and the typologies, is an important skill, as well as doing the investigations. So I think, and certainly I think, as technology evolves, that skill set's going to be ever more important part for financial crime fighters' skill set. So I think that's going to be quite important. And I'm sure we already do see technology teams in the financial crime space that are using skills like SQL and Python to work with large amounts of data. So I think those technical skills will, in certain roles, will become quite key. The other types of skills would be critical thinking. So having a really good, being able to understand complex situations, complex environments where there may be competing priorities or regulatory considerations or technology considerations, and be able to really identify the core risks to the business within those situations, and be able to mitigate those risks. So I think critical thinking is a key skill set as well.
Probably a few years ago, you wouldn't have considered like thinking about Python, for example, into financial crime. The correlation of this is very interesting, because you can see that technology is becoming more present also in this type of line of business, which before was mainly only through IT or other type of department. So if you are considering to move into this industry, keep in mind those advice also on the technology aspect that Quentin just suggested. And as you know, Quentin, I recently launched the FinCrime Career Accelerator course. So I wanted to ask you, how important is the continuous learning and upskilling in the financial crime field, especially with these emerging technologies, and of course, including AI, blockchain, just to mention a couple?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, and I think it is really important to stay up to date. I think it's all part of managing your own career, really. It is. Let's remember that these roles are very exciting, but as with many roles in the UK, and I think financial crime roles are no exception to that, it is still a very competitive environment for securing a role. So as an example, for let's say first line KYC roles, if a job advert goes up for a KYC role, within 24 hours there could be 200 to 300 applications to that position. So it's extremely competitive. I mean, I think the competition thins as the roles become more less process orientated and either more technical, so either involve using technology skills or for example, very strong on the require very strong regulatory knowledge, or on more senior positions that require very strong, I guess, influencing skills, stakeholder management skills, those sorts of things, working with regulators, etc. So I think this is all part of managing your career, which is really important. So keeping up to date and keeping yourself up to date with, say, for example, changing regulations through say, for example, the FinCrime Agent training. Absolutely. I mean, it's really, really important to keep on top of that. And I think that keeps you a step ahead of, I guess, let's face it, competition that are not going through continuous learning and upskilling themselves. And of course, to secure new roles in the ever-changing market, for example, with crypto or blockchain, as an example, digital assets, which the financial conduct, it should be an interesting year in that space, by the way, in 2025 in the UK, because the Financial Conduct Authority has released its roadmap for regulation of the digital assets industry in 2025. So we're definitely expecting to see more work in that space. So I think keeping up to date with things like AI and digital assets, blockchain, and incorporating that with your financial crime abilities through training, upskilling, is key. I'd also add networking to that as well. So attending conferences. So there are free networking events and conferences out there, as well as the paid ones, and you can learn a huge amount by speaking to people at those events and listening to the panels, and even speaking at those events as well. It would certainly enhance your career. Certainly, when candidates have been interviewing for us and they've been on panels within their preferred space, so financial crime panels, for example, that has come up in conversations in interviews, and I think it just shows a dedication to the industry, and that you're really on top of everything and all the emerging regulations and technologies. So it's all around managing your career, managing your CV, and really sort of future-proofing yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And was wondering if there are currently any recruitment trends or market insight in financial crime, including salary expectations, perhaps, and future hiring trends. Is there anything you can share on that?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, that's the day to day, really. So, if we look at 2024, let's do the whole picture. So I'd say relatively normal markets. Then COVID came. There was a big pause on hiring across the world, of course, in financial crime included. Incidentally, fraud and financial crime grew massively during those years, particularly online fraud and financial crime. There was then a huge demand. I guess it was called the I think it was called the Great Redundancy or the Great Change or something along those lines. In 2021, the Great Change, where people wanted to change roles for various reasons. So there was a huge amount of hiring done in 2021 and 2022. It was a crazy amount of hiring, really, and salaries increased massively during that period. So there was a lot of pent up demand, which was met. And then in 2023, it calmed down quite a lot, and that brings us to 2024, where early 2024 the markets were still fairly subdued after 2023, where there was a lot of uncertainty and there was a mini recession in the UK. We did see more roles in asset management in the early stages of 2024. Insurance has been quite busy. So there's been roles in the financial crime space and insurance, and also consultancies as well, particularly boutique consultancies that have been hiring FinCrime and compliance professionals. I'd say the fintech, mainly due to funding, has been a bit more subdued, and we're starting to see some big projects and things coming back in the banking space, which is really encouraging. I think FinCrime recruitment can sometimes be a bit cyclical. So, if there's a regulatory intervention, for example, there's normally there's quite often a lot of investment that goes into a business. There's a lot of hiring that goes into the business. Resources are brought on board. The problem is then fixed, and then perhaps those resources are then pulled back. To an extent where there's not enough resources in the business, and then the issue may happen again. So we've seen that with a few business, and there's been quite a few big names out there this year that have had regulatory issues, not just in the UK, but globally. And we've seen some really big fines out there in many billions. So the investment to get those fixed that will require the hiring of financial crime professionals. I think the other things we'll see in 2025 is greater demand for contractors. We're already seeing. I mean, there's maybe the perm recruitment has been relatively flat. I mean, it's but the contractor hiring is starting to go up after some changes in the way contractors were paid in called IR35. But we expect there to be more demand in the contract space, particularly for projects that are coming back on board with regard to systems, processes, or people change, or regulatory change, or dealing with regulatory issues, essentially. One piece of advice I would definitely say around if people are already in a role is that we're seeing people managing to secure a pay increase of around 10 to 15% if they change role. I think the internal pay rises, certainly what we've seen speaking to people, as sometimes a bit less than that. So if you're looking to increase your salary by about 10 to 15%, sometimes higher, sometimes it's better to make a move to another organization.
Thank you, Quentin. I also wanted to check on possible challenges the company faces when hiring talent in the financial crime sector, and how can candidates position themselves to actually stand out? We talked before about big volumes and significant competition out there when a new job is posted. So what can they do actually to stand out?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, if I start with the first part of the question, which I guess is around the challenges companies face, and I think probably a good point to know here is whether or not the compliance culture of a company is known publicly, essentially. So I think if a company is perceived to have it's perceived to be under-resourced and not have a great compliance culture, then they may find it harder to attract the best talent that's out there and also retain that talent. And I guess what I mean by compliance culture is the financial crime team, is the compliance team, are they integral to the business? Are they seen as a business, as we've discussed earlier, are they seen as a business enabler and a protector rather than a cost, essentially? And if that is the case, then I think that there is is perceived as a good compliance culture. It's a well-resourced financial crime function, and that will attract talent to the business and lessen the challenges, I guess. And the other things we mentioned about fast-changing regulations and competing priorities in business, and being able to build relationships with the front office and those types of areas that before onboarding clients, for example. So I think individuals that can demonstrate some of those skill sets is quite important, and I think businesses quite often are looking for people that can fit into their culture, and sometimes that is where the challenge is. They can find people with the right skills to do the role, but can they find people that fit into the actual business culture of their organization, that they can work with for 8 hours a day, those types of things that are going to be credible with other parts of the business, that can face off to the regulator and on a credible basis and make things happen. So, the challenge to business is finding those types of people with those very critical soft skills, I think. From a job seeker's perspective, being able to stand out, I think there's certainly some of the things that we spoke about earlier are going to be quite important. So the kind of the upskilling and the continuous learning, but definitely I think is critical is around managing your CV, managing your career effectively, and taking on roles that you're good at, that you love, that have the right sort of purpose for you. And that you want to progress in, and I think if you can demonstrate that you've picked the right company and you've taken on certain roles and you've progressed in that organization and being offered more responsibility and given new and different tasks and taking the initiative and things like that, and you can demonstrate that on your CV and you can demonstrate that at interview, as well as all the technical skills that are required for the role, such as the regulatory knowledge and the IT skills and things like that, depending on the role, and then that will help you stand out for sure. So I think it's important to manage that side as well. Ensure if you're not a contractor, then you'll ensure that you've got a stable CV and that you've got reasons for leaving roles if you've left roles after a short period of time, etc. So yes, I think it's all around the old traditional kind of managing your career really, which is quite important.
Yeah, and that takes me actually to another angle that I wanted to touch base with you, and then I think we are towards the end of our discussion, which is how crucial it is for candidate to conduct the due diligence before accepting a role, and what factor they should then consider when evaluating a potential employer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it kind of leads in nicely from what we were talking about with regard to compliance culture. So, I guess as a job seeker, you would want to join an organisation where a compliance department, financial crime department is well resourced, and there's a great compliance culture there. So, I think the ways to find that out is, I guess, is essentially you can find out lots of information from, say, LinkedIn, for example. What is the turnover of MLROs in that organization? If the MLRO is leaving every 9 to 12 months or less, then that should be a red flag, essentially. And I think a lot of people that will be watching this or listening to this will be very good at due diligence, and understand how to run due diligence on firms, but I think it is really important to do that due diligence because, as we've mentioned earlier, it's about managing your career and progressing within organizations and demonstrating that. So doing the due diligence, checking turnover of MLRO and the senior team, checking funding of an organization. Is the organization well funded? Are they actually going places? Are they going to be able to sustain you in your career? You could look at customer experience or customer reviews of products. If it was a fintech, for example, if it was a growing firm. I will mention kind of regulatory interventions or actions as well, although that's can sometimes be seen as an opportunity, because quite often after a regulatory intervention, there is a huge amount of investment that goes into financial crime. So again, that could be an opportunity and also be part of the due diligence that you conduct. And again, networking. You potentially. Who do you know in your network that may have worked there, might know the organization? Who have you bumped into that could give you some insight into an organization that you're looking at?
Thank you. Very, very useful. And thank you so much for your time. If people want to get in touch with you for opportunities or maybe to find out more about the market, what is the best way to get in touch with you, Quentin?
The best way is definitely LinkedIn. I'm very active on there. So it's Quentin Downs at 2084. Just drop me a a message or a connection on LinkedIn, and I'll come back to you, or my email address, which is quentin@2084.com.
Perfect. I will leave all this information in the description of the video, of course, so people can just check down there to see all your contact details. And it was very enjoyable to speak with you today, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with the FinCrime Agent community.
Absolute pleasure, Marco. Real pleasure to be on here.
And as always, I close this video to say that if you haven't subscribed yet, remember to subscribe to FinCrime Agent so you don't miss other videos like the one we did today. And if you liked what you've seen, press the like button, as this will help massively the channel to grow and for this video to reach more people. So thank you, Quentin, one more time, and thank you all for watching. Until next time, see you soon.